Thank you very much for inviting me here, and thank you, Martin, for your presentation. I'm going to argue that this being the forward-looking, positive, optimistic part of this seminar, that we need the capital market union, but that the capital market union can only work if we have healthy banks. The banks are in a complex situation today. There is a very difficult macroeconomic environment, but there's also a lot of insecurity when it comes to regulation. More so in Europe than in the US. And you cannot really change the macroeconomic environment. You can prepare, but you can work on the regulatory uncertainties. And in that sense, the contribution of the Commission is extremely helpful, because we foresee and we hope that some of the responses that Martin and his very dynamic team have put together will give us clarity in terms of where we go. And I think that's really great process and great progress. And I was going to say that better regulation is a process, but it's also an aim, because we come from a time, I can remember when I started working, we learned about the proposal when it was published in the official journal, more or less. And in the meantime, we really feel that the Commission has added a lot in terms of the consultations, the green papers, the action plan, the interaction with stakeholders, the feedback, and the invitation today twice to stay in a conversation. I also have to say that sometimes the industry is not that good at providing feedback. I can remember that as a head of trade associations, we were sometimes begging our members to give data to ESMA and others. And I have to say that be it exchanges or banks, we were not extremely sort of productive in helping ESMA calibrate some of these things, or in putting together a very solid agenda for the Commission. So I really think that there needs to be progress on both sides of the alley. Now, as I said, today banks are in a difficult position. We know that the return on equity barely or sometimes doesn't even cover the cost of capital. And when you look at the macroeconomic environment, as I've already alluded to, it's very, very difficult to make a profit. We also have a complex environment where it's very difficult for the banks to raise equity. Analysts don't really understand the European models. Bail-in has created uncertainty over whether it's such a good idea to be an investor in a bank. So we have sort of restricted the ability of the banks to regenerate and to increase their lending capacities. And hence, we very much look forward to Martin and the Commission to create clarity around the Basel agenda. It has already been discussed, I thought, quite well in the first panel, and that's really one of the very, very important issues. And banking structure was also discussed. We also are still having an FTT proposal that is floating around that's certainly not helping the capital market union. And does it matter? And I would argue yes, because we want to have efficient banks in Europe. You cannot have a capital market union without banks. You want to have banks that are investment banks, that can take you to a primary market, that can do private placements, that can issue your debt, that can make the markets in the secondary markets. And actually, when you look at the performance of European banks, over the last 5 years, the European banks have lost 10% of their market share, whereas the US counterparties have gained more or less 10%. And when you look at the second tier, so you have the 5 big US banks, which have been quite good at sort of competing against us. But then in the second tier, what do you see? You have 2 Swiss banks, which I'm very proud to represent. But then you have also, in the UK, HSBC and Barclays. And then you have the French banks. And when you look at that group, they will be subject to different rules. We will not have a coherent approach to these global banks. And I think in Europe it's going to be extremely important to make sure that we stay coherent. And this is really one of the things that we are very much looking forward to see also in the work of the Commission, is deepening the capital market union, but also ensuring that there is international coherence going forward, because definitely in the current environment, you don't want each and every jurisdiction to go off and have a different plan with a different rule. And in Europe, we are already too divided, and we will very much look forward to the Commission to continue to maintain the international dialogues that they have, the work they do with IOSCO, the work that they do in Basel, but also the bilateral work that they do with their US counterparts, of course their Swiss counterparts, and possibly in the future with the UK as a counterpart.